The United States makes the UN work when it wants it to work. And that is exactly the way it should be, because the only question to the United States is what's in our national interest.
My name is John, and the International Criminal Court is now in session. It is July 7th, 2025, and once again we are taking a look at the situation within Ukraine. So let's start. First of all, we are going to talk about the Zaporozhye direction. Now, as all of you remember, 3 years ago, when the current war in Ukraine started, the Russians, for the most part, had an easy time in Zaporozhye region. They took Melitopol without a fight, took Mok, Vasilivka, they took Poloi, they took Berdyansk, mostly without a fight, Energodar, you name it. They took around like 70 or so percent of Zaporozhye Oblast, for the most part without a fight. I think they did see some conflict in Energodar because of its strategic importance, but the AFU really couldn't do much, and as a result, they had no choice but to fold back, or they surrendered, were maybe killed, who knows. But yeah, they lost majority of Zaporozhye region. But however, the Russians were not able to advance towards Zaporozhye city, which is the provincial capital of Zaporozhye Oblast. Russia, as you expect, has claimed that Zaporozhye city is a part of Russia via the annexation that they did 3 years ago. And the reason why they haven't been able to reach the city of Zaporozhye is because the AFU, I guess you could say, got its shit together. The Russians ran out of steam, or perhaps, I don't know, something happened. And one of the things that they did was that they set up some reliable defenses at Guleipol, Orikhiv, and Kamensky. But as of today, after 3 years of non-stop fighting in this particular town, it appears that Kamensky is going to fall to Russia. Last week, the Russians, out of nowhere, went on the offensive in this town, and as of today, they have taken control over most of the town of Kamensky. As all of you know, Russia, throughout the past couple of years, basically split Kamensky down the river here. Ukrainians controlled the north, while the Russians controlled the south. It was sort of basically a de facto border for a while. But at times, the armed forces of Ukraine would try to go on multiple counterattacks and retake full control of Kamensky. Most of them, as you know by now, have failed. If not all of them, that is. And in recent days, the Russians decided to go on their own offensive in Kamensky. And it appears that this offensive, as far as we know, has been successful. The Russians now control basically 3/4 of Kamensky, and the only part that they do not control yet is basically this part here, the northern, central part. And the Russians have advanced so far that according to Deep State UA, they are now on the doorstep of the village of Plavny, which is directly connected to the Dnieper River. And if they were to take Plavny, they will then reach the strategic town of Stepnohersk. Now, Stepnohersk is a very unusual place in Zaporozhye region because, on one hand, it looks small, but it also looks kind of challenging because, yes, your eyes are not deceiving you people, there are commie blocks here, or microdistricts, as they called them in the Soviet Union. There are commie blocks here, and this alone makes it quite a challenge for the Russians to deal with if they were to ever reach this town. But based on the current well-being of the armed forces of Ukraine at the moment, I honestly don't know if they're going to be able to hold Stepnohursk, let alone all these settlements here along the Konka River. I feel like the Russians' objective this summer, like at best, now I don't know if they're going to be able to accomplish this feat, is for them to reach as far as the Konka River, which not only protects Kamyansky from any further Ukrainian counterattacks, but it also gives the Russians the ability to strike at Zaporozhye city with FPV drones. So the Russians would be within striking distance of Zaporozhye city, and they would make life an absolute living hell for anybody who's still living there. So yeah, it is very possible that the Russians are aiming to go this far this summer in their offensive in the Zaporozhye region, but I don't know. As all of you know by now, the group of forces Dnieper, which is one of the Russian army groups in Ukraine, is not really necessarily known for being an offensive-oriented unit. They seem more defensive-minded. And to be honest, I feel like that's where their strength really lies, is their defense, not really their offense. But maybe I could be wrong. Maybe the Russians will put up a better, effective offensive effort in Zaporozhye region this summer than many expect. And Ukrainians might be cooked. And besides, there have also been some reliable reports speculating that the Ukrainians have moved a lot of their guys within the Zaporozhye region to the Sumy region to protect Sumy city from the Russians that are invading there. But time will tell if that is true, and time will also tell if these Ukrainian defenses here, let alone near Orkiv or in Galeopol, will halt. But with that being said, let's move to the South Donetsk / Dnipropetrovsk direction. So, this is a very vital front, even though many don't seem to be talking about it, well, at least on the pro-Ukrainian side, but many pro-Argu people, and I guess neutral people are, so I guess that's majority that is. But the Russians are advancing quite well in the direction of the border with Dnipropetrovsk region, and it seems that it is very likely that in the coming weeks or so, the Russians are not only going to reach the border with Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, but they're going to cross that border and try to seize some settlements, which would, in return, they would claim to be part of Russia in a future referendum, that is. Now, what I think is going to happen here is that once they're done with this entire 200-plus square kilometer pocket, it's that the Russians are going to cross into Dnipropetrovsk, and I believe one of the first major objectives they're going to try to accomplish is the village or town of Komikhalivka. This will be one of their first major objectives. But I also think what will happen is that they will also look to try to flank Galeopol within Zaporozhye region. And because of that, I am expecting them to advance towards Pokrovsk right here. And they're now also above the advances, the defensive fortifications that are supposed to be guarding the Galeopol area. And with this area now breached, the Russians can now essentially take a bunch of these no-name Dnipropetrovsk villages, for the most part, maybe without a problem. Though I will say that this particular settlement here may be a little bit of an issue due to these forested areas and the water barrier. But for the most part, though, everything south of it, I don't know if the Russians will have that much of an issue. But yeah, when the proper push into Dnipropetrovsk begins, 3 settlements will definitely be on the Russians' radar. Pokrovsk, Prosina, and Novopavlovka. And from Novopavlovka, they can then advance on the key TO-406 town of Mizova. And it's possible that from this particular place, they may be able to declare a military civil administration like they did in the Kharkiv region, or Kharkov, region, that is. So anyway, let's break down the advances. First of all, where do I start? Pidubine is under Russian control. This is like arguably one of the last couple of pieces for the Russians to basically use in order to assemble their control over the southwestern Donetsk area. And with the taking of Pidubine, I don't expect the Russians to have that many issues reaching the border with Dnipropetrovsk. They can literally just cross these empty fields here, and it will already be over for this area. Like, they could literally reach the Volcha River without that much of an issue. Though, whether or not if they cross it remains to be seen. Now, they do have at least maybe one or like a couple more challenges left. Andriivka, Klevstove, and Zeline High, which are connected to the settlements of Pita Rylivka and Ivanovka. So these would be two Dnipropetrovsk settlements that the Russians could try to take upon like actually entering the province itself if they want to do a proper offensive on Pryzena. But also they could, if they want to take Novopavlivka, they would have to take these two. And then you essentially would have a lot of empty fields before entering all these no-name villages here. I mean, Dnipropetrovsk region is no joke. It is the second largest province in all of Ukraine, and is also second largest population-wise too. So there's a lot of reasons why it's important. But also, besides Pidubine, the Russians are currently contesting for the village of Tolstoy. And there is speculation right now that the village, at least according to Divjin, has already fallen to Russia. And I think Deep State has it completely under a gray zone at this point, so that's pretty much confirming Russian control if you ask me. But also, Mayern, which is south of Pidubine, is also now contested. And as far as I know, it doesn't look like the Ukrainians are going to put up a fight for it. If you ask me, folks, the armed forces of Ukraine in southwestern Donetsk are cooked. They are finished there. They are likely going to withdraw from this area into Dnipro region. And as a result, the Russians are just going to take most of these 200 square kilometers, mostly maybe without a fight, probably by the end of July, if not early August. Oh, and sorry, the map marked Komar for some reason. And also, there's word on the street that the Russians have also started contesting for the village of Baskresinka, which is, ironically, on the border with Dnipro region. So, yeah. But the Russians, though, have reached the Dnipropetrovsk border from the village of Shevchenko. And the first settlement that they could take here would be Malivka. And from Zeline Pule within Donetsk, they would have to cross through Zaporozhye region and to try to take these series of border villages here. But what I think the Russians are going to do is they're going to take these, okay, cross into Dnipropetrovsk, and then they will flank everything here. Everything here, all these border villages with Donetsk and Zaporozhye region will be flanked by the Russians from the north, and it will cause the AFU to basically run away mostly without a fight. And because these villages don't really hold any strategic value, like in size or providing any terrain advantage, I don't expect them to really put on that much of a fight for them. So expect throughout the course of the rest of July and maybe August, as late as like maybe September, for Russians to contest really hard for this area in Dnipro. And with that, let's move a little bit towards Dnipropetrovsk region itself, at least in this direction, south of Novopavlovka. So apparently, Dachny, the Russian MOD claimed that they have captured the village of Dachny. But the Ukrainians are disputing this and saying that they have counterattacked and reclaimed control of it, but more geolocated footage is coming out stating the opposite. If you ask me, I feel like the Ukrainians put out old videos. I mean, they were definitely there. But those videos, in my opinion, were pre-recorded for the purpose of, like, letting people know, like, hey, the situation in Dnipro region is under control. There's nothing to worry about. I mean, it's all media bullcrap. So, yeah, I think Dachny is under Russian control. Most likely. If it isn't, I'd be shocked. The fields outside of Oleksivka are not yet completely under Russian control, though it's probably going to be all over by perhaps maybe the end of July. I mean, all of this is definitely going to be gone by the time we get to August. Like, I'm absolutely certain of that. And then going a little up north to the Udachny direction, which is pretty much Pokrovsk front, that is, Ukrainians have reportedly re-entered the village of Novosergivka and retook some houses here. Now, from what I understand, there are some Ukrainian soldiers here in this strategic, I guess, fortifications area here, and because of that, this prevents the Russians from advancing into Dnipropetrovsk from the Pokrovsk direction, or the TL-406 road, and because of that, they're able to launch counterattacks on the Russians in this direction here, but also, it prevents the Russians from achieving their goals in Udachny and Molodetsky. But I think at some point the Russians are going to be able to crack this area, though it still needs a lot of time before that can happen. And then we get to the big fish itself of the day, the Pokrovsk/Krasnaya Amisk direction. A lot of things have been happening here as of late that I want to talk about. And first of all, in the southern part of the Pokrovsk direction, nothing really much has changed. Not here either. And for the most part, not even in the western direction. But in the eastern part of the Pokrovsk direction, a lot of things have been happening. First of all, Poltavka and Popiv Yar were retaken by the AFU in a counterattack. And as far as I know, it seems like, I guess maybe they did this for the purpose of maybe giving the Ukrainians there some breathing room. Like, the AFU gave themselves some breathing room, so it's not really an issue anymore. Though it doesn't really change the grand scheme of things on the ground, that is. And going a little further west, we see that we got a breakthrough here. Now, Syriac, for some reason, painted the village of Maro Lyubivka under Ukrainian control. He said they counterattacked and retook it. Based on, like, one video by, like, Lost Armor that showed, like, Ukrainians, I guess, getting hit by FPV drones or whatever in the village itself. But does that really constitute as a recapture by the AFU? No. Hell no. The village of, not town, village of Maro Lyubivka, I am certain that it's under Russian control right now, and the Ukrainians, whatever counterattack they did down there had already failed a long time ago, and the mappers completely dropped the ball on it. And also, there was a report last night by Creamy Caprice that in a recent attack by the Russians, they have broken into the town or village of Novi Konomichny, and as a result, they have reached the center of the village. And there's also now reports speculating too by the Institute of Study of War, which is a neocon outlet, that Mykolaiivka has already fallen to Russia. And I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. And then going a little further up north, Rezin is now under Russian control. And because of this, it appears that Novi Konomichny, northern outskirts, are under threat too by the Russians. Now, with the breakthrough of the Russians on the eastern Pokrovsk flanks, what do I expect will happen here? If you ask me, I think the Russians are not going to be able to flank Pokrovsk. Well, in the way you guys may imagine. I don't think the Russians are going to go through these fields here or through these villages and reach Rodensky to flank Krasnaya Amisk for good. I don't think that's going to happen. Instead, the Russians are going to fight block for block in these villages here, and then we will see the Battle of Mayanograd. The Russians will duke it out with the armed forces of Ukraine for Mayanograd, And once that happens, it's going to probably be another like 1 to 2 month long meat grinder, if not longer than that. And then after that, Pokrovsk is finished. Pokrovsk cannot exist without Myanograd. They do not exist without one or the other holding. It's that simple. And what I expect to happen is that Myanograd will be broken into in the next few weeks or so, maybe by late July or August. I mean, I'm basically putting everything in August at this point. And then after that, time will then tell for how long it will take before the Russians take the city. And then after that, you will then get the final fate of Pokrovsk itself. I honestly don't know if this city is going to hold as long as many people think it will, like in an actual battle. I don't know. Something tells me that it's going to fall the same way that Avdiivka, Ugledar, Selidova, like all did, and Velika Novosilka. Time will tell, but I am leaning towards the idea of the AFU fleeing from Pokrovsk without mostly fighting. I just can't see them being here for much longer. I think they're going to be out of here probably by the end of 2025, certainly. But in 1-2 months, no. I think they're going to keep fighting. Now let's move to the Konstantinovka front. Yep, I called it that. Deep State has confirmed that the Russians have advanced into the central part of Yablonovka, and it appears that they have taken basically the entirety of the western section of the village. There aren't any reports, though, about the central part yet, and there's also reports that Ukrainians have been able to keep the Russians out of this part of Yablonovka, and as a result, Alexandro Kalinove is contested again. But I don't know how long it's going to be. I doubt it will hold that long. In the city of Toretsk, it appears that the battle for this city is coming to a close. Deep State UA has confirmed the complete capture of the Zabolka district by the Russians. And as a result, pretty much 99% of Toretsk is under Russian control, with the exception of this small pocket or gray zone here. So after a year of fighting, the Battle of Toretsk is pretty much over. The city will be categorized as completely controlled by Russia as soon as maybe next week or so, maybe by the 3rd week of July. I mean, it won't matter. Toretsk has, for the most part, fallen. And in my opinion, it may fall around the same time, if not sooner, than Chasiv Yar. And speaking of which, let's talk about it. So there was a report that the Russians have not only taken this neighborhood here within Chasiv Yar, but they have also captured the entirety of Mykolaiivka. And if this were to be true, then these Ukrainians here would be besieged, encircled, or caught in a cauldron, which would in turn lead to their collapse. So in this case, it would mean that the Russians have taken control of most of Chasiv Yar, and the only parts of the town that have not yet been taken yet are these deep south neighborhoods here. But yeah, the Battle of Chasiv Yar is coming to a close too. I think it's definitely going to be this month. And also the Russians have reportedly advanced on the outskirts of it up north. But that's it. There's even some reports, at least according to Zoka's channel on Telegram, that the Russians have reached as far as Chervony, but time will tell if that is the case or not. And there was also a report that the Russians took the village of Pidichne, but there's nothing to confirm this advance either. Now, if they were to capture this, then they're already essentially at the doorstep of Konstantinovka. Now let's move to the Siversk direction. Russians are at the doors of Siversk, so the battle for this town is about to start. And in the village of Serebrinka, around half of the village is under Russian control. Now, it is not determined who controls these fields at this time. I mean, even though it has an AFU favor, I honestly don't know if they really controlled that much of the fields at this point. It's a gray zone, a literal killing field, if you ask me. But once Serebranka falls to Russia, then the Russians will be able to push on Siversk without many issues, and then we can then start counting down the weeks or months before the town falls to Russia. And if Siversk were to fall to Russia, then Liman would be partly encircled on one side, but I honestly don't know if Siversk is going to matter that much because, I mean, like, when you compare it to, like, other places in Donbass, it's not really that important. I mean, all it would is, like, maybe give Russians the opportunity to maybe reverse some Ukrainian counteroffensive gains, like, from 2022. Like, reverse those gains. But I honestly don't know other than that. And then going further up north, the Russians have been doing, okay in the Liman direction. There have been some reported advances outside of the village, if not within the village of Zelina Dolina. And there's also reports of the Russians advancing in the eastern part of Kaprovka. In the village of Ridukdub, sorry if I butchered the pronunciation of it, the Ukrainians are fighting hard for it, but it's not known who has the upper hand at this time. I do think Russians have a slight edge, though the Ukrainians are really putting on one hell of a fight because they don't want to lose this village. Because if they were to lose it, then everything here connected to the Oskar River, which would in turn go to Izium and Borova, would be cut off. And speaking of the Borova/Kupiansk direction, the armed forces of Ukraine have gone on a counteroffensive here, and it appears that Zarizove is back under Ukrainian control for the most part, and then it also appears they're trying to advance again on the village of Koliznikovka. Now, going up north, there are conflicting reports regarding the Russian control over the outskirts of Kupiansk city. And as far as I know, at least according to Radov, that is, Anatoly Radov on Telegram, Ratkovka is pretty much under Russian control along with Kindrashovka. But the reports regarding Moskovka and Sobolivka are not true. The Russians have reported two of these villages to be under Russian control at this point, which essentially puts them already within inside Kupiansk city itself. But the problem, though, is we have no confirmations whatsoever, geolocations-wise that is, to confirm these captures. And because of that, I have to say that this shit is fake news. Now, moving towards the greater Kharkiv direction, or Kharkov direction, that is, Russians have advanced in the direction of the village of Storivka and have taken these hills here. And then the Russians made a surprising move on the town of Veliki Burluk and have taken control over the village of Milove and its hills nearby. So the Russians have started an offensive in an attempt to take the town of Veliki Burluk. Now, I don't know how committed the Russians are to this particular operation, like is or are within the Veliki Burluk direction, within the Kharkiv direction, but the reason why Veliki Burluk is so important is because it's a crossroad like section. Veliki Burluk connects to Chuagiv, it connects to Kupiansk, Dvorichina, it connects to Volchansk and the Russian border, which is Belgrade, and then it connects also to the to like other parts of the Russian border, like regions here. But yeah, so this total area here is around like 23 square kilometers. It's quite a big gain for the Russians, though I will say it could be bigger. And I feel like one of their first objectives, that is, that they're trying to achieve here, is that they're going to try to connect this pocket here from the border with the rest of the Zapad group in the Kupiansk direction. And once they're able to achieve this, then the actual push on Veliki Berlik will start. And then you will see an even greater pressure being put on the city of Kupiansk. But time will tell, though, if the Russians are able to pull it off this summer. Though I don't rule out the possibility that Kupiansk will be back under Russian control by the end of 2025. Though I also wouldn't be surprised if they're not able to achieve that objective either. Nothing much really happening in Volchansk other than the regular artillery shellings and I guess maybe the attempted assault on the industrial zone here. But yeah, nothing really much going on. And then in the Sumy region, the armed forces of Ukraine are attempting to go on the counteroffensive once again, trying to retake the village of Kendrativka from the Russians, along with Konstantinivka. Ukrainians also, for the time being, have been stopped in the direction of Oleksivka and also appear to be struggling in the village or town of Yanakovka. There's also reports that the Russians were also able to advance in the vicinity of Satki 2, like a 5-kilometer advance, but we have no confirmation of that. And also, to cap off the video, it appears that the Ukrainian offensive into Tetkino has failed, and as a result, the offensive into Tetkino is turning around and going back to Sumy. The Russians have already captured their first settlement within Sumy region from the Tetkino direction, and that is Basilivka. And with that, everybody, this concludes this week's updates. I hoped all of you enjoyed it. A lot of interesting things are going on within Ukraine right now, but time will tell if the Russians are able to further develop their offensive. Sorry, that is. I mean, it's late night here on the West Coast, so obviously I'm going to sound a little tired or stuttery or what. But, yeah, time will tell if the Russians' summertime offensive will get, worse for the armed forces of Ukraine, or if the Ukrainians are able to hold off the Russians to localized/limited gains. But if I have to take a prediction on how the Russians will perform this summer, I expect them to try to reverse some of the losses they sustained in the 2022 Kharkiv counteroffensive. I expect them to try to maybe take more of the eastern side of the Oskar River. I also expect them to maybe take, let's see here, definitely closing this pocket here that's south of Konstantinovka. And I also expect them to start the battle for Pokrovsk too. I'm also expecting them to do well in the Dnipropetrovsk region and also doing quite well in Zaporozhye region as well. So yeah, that's my prediction for the summer 2025 offensive by Russia. And I'll see you all next time. So I hope everybody has a great day or night wherever you are in the world. And I hope all of you take care. So peace out and goodbye.